In this video, I will show you all 6 players that you need to succeed for the single game showdown captain mode on DraftKings tomorrow night, as the Chicago Bears have to rely on Mitchell Trubisky to get the job done against their divisional rivals and potential kings of the NFC, Green Bay Packers. My name's Quick Pick Nick, and having simulated hundreds of thousands of roster builds, here are your locks and lotteries for Sunday Night Football, November 29th, 2020. If you like this kind of fast-paced, calculated content, subscribe and stay tuned for more lineups throughout the season, including a FanDuel version of this slate tomorrow morning. I'm currently planning a rework of my primary picks videos for those bigger main slates, so expect a new format down the line at some point in a few weeks, but for now I'll just double down on my most popular Sunday night lineups with both DraftKings and FanDuel lineups temporarily. To start off this lineup, the first 2 locks, at least to me, seem pretty obvious, as they are the only 2 players in this slate who can consistently score more than 20 fantasy points per game, and who will become the foundation of this entire lineup. Those 2 players are Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams. While the argument may be made that Aaron Jones is another option who might be able to score above 20, Jones hasn't proved that type of consistency over the past few weeks, most recently surpassing that benchmark all the way back in week 4 when he scored just 22 fantasy points. So I'd consider Jones more of a middle 10s fantasy option rather than a 20s and above option, the category in which both Rodgers and Adams belong. In harsh contrast to Jones's failure to score more than 20 fantasy points since the beginning of October, Rodgers has only fallen below 20 fantasy points once this entire season, and not even by much, scoring 19 fantasy points all the way back in week 2. Rodgers hasn't had a disappointing game all season, and against the Bears defense, who spends twice as much time on the field as their offense, Rodgers will have plenty of opportunities to keep the streak of massive fantasy performances alive. This continuation will be made possible in part by Rodgers' favorite target, Davante Adams, who still ranks first in the league in all relevant wide receiver statistics, including first in receiving yards, touchdowns, receptions, and targets per game. It really doesn't matter who's guarding him either, as Adams scored 26.5 fantasy points last week against the Colts, and a few weeks ago, 36 against the 49ers. This duo of Rodgers and Adams cannot be stopped, and I don't expect this Chicago team, who can't seem to keep the ball out of their side of the field, to slow this combo at all. As for which player should be in the MVP position, my model projects Rodgers to have similar fantasy numbers to Adams, so this isn't really one of the situations where there's a significant difference in points with our MVP, but rather one in which we're able to save some cash by taking the second most expensive option rather than the top choice. Both will probably have relatively huge nights, so in order to save an extra $1,800 on DraftKings, we likely won't have to sacrifice many fantasy points, if any fantasy points at all, by scoring Adams regularly with Rodgers in the 1.5 times slot. The third and final lock my model found is a rather cheap option who is likely the most underrated player in this slate, that being Jamal Williams. At only $3,400, Williams ranks below the kickers on DraftKings, which is surprisingly low considering his touchdown potential as a reliable change of pace back for Green Bay. Last week, Adams saw nearly a third of the carries for the Packers backfield, with the remainder of course going to Adam Jones, but that kind of volume and presence on the field throughout the game has allowed Williams to score some decent fantasy points, including 8.5 last week and an average above 10 season long. I don't expect Williams to have a massive night, given his output will always be capped since he only sees a portion of Green Bay's snaps, but for just $3,400 on DraftKings, we'll be able to get more than enough value to justify his selection. Using the money we save here allows us to get our first lottery from the Bears, Allen Robinson, who's a lottery because of the switch back to Mitchell Trubisky, with Nick Foles currently doubtful for tomorrow's contest, but even with Trubisky back under center, Robinson will still likely be able to perform at a high level. Over the 3 games at the beginning of the season in which Trubisky started for the Bears, Robinson averaged nearly 17 fantasy points per game, and against the Packers' middle-of-the-road secondary, Robinson should be able to get his connection with Trubisky right back on track tomorrow night. The second lottery my model chose is Anthony Miller, who's a lottery for the same reason as Robinson, that Foles won't be Miller's quarterback this week. Miller has seen a much greater involvement in the offense recently though, averaging nearly 9 targets per game over the past 3 weeks, suggesting that he may continue to be a solid alternate option outside of Robinson for Chicago. With the remaining budget, we're able to get Mason Crosby, a consistent kicker whose only miss came on one of his 4 extra points in week 4, but has otherwise been perfect. Still though, Crosby's a kicker who can never guarantee points, but for $3,800, 8 or so fantasy points should be enough for our last lottery. That's what my model was able to come up with for the Sunday night single game showdown captain mode on DraftKings tomorrow night, November 29th, 2020. This has been Quick Pick Nick, the intersection for sports, data analysis, and speed. Thanks for watching.